Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're taking a seriously fascinating journey that connects a few things you probably never thought went together. We are linking the mechanics of 18th century historical automata, highly regulated pharmaceutical manufacturing data, and the modern problem-solving frameworks of agile software development. It's this incredible tangled web of ideas, and we're going to untangle the whole shebang right now.
Okay, let's dive right into this. When you think of a robot or an automated assembly line, what comes to mind? Probably a machine just blindly doing the exact same thing over and over, right? Well, there's a much deeper concept out there called automation with a human face, or sometimes you'll hear it called automation. We're going to explore how this core idea radically differs from the traditional blind automation we usually picture.
Here is our roadmap for today's explainer. First, automation with a human face. Second, the pharmaceutical Toyota ambition. Third, the process control progress report. Then, advanced tech and robotics. And finally, applying Jidoka to agile teams. Let's get to it.
Part 1. Automation with a human face, focusing on intelligent manufacturing.
If we look at traditional automation, we can actually trace its conceptual roots all the way back to 18th century automata from France and Japan. These were absolutely fascinating mechanical devices built to repeat actions flawlessly. But traditional automation has one fatal flaw. It operates completely blind. If a part on the conveyor belt is broken, basic automation doesn't care. It just keeps pushing that bad product right down the line. Modern automation, on the other hand, is built for intelligent, human-like assessment. It doesn't just act, it evaluates what it's doing.
And that brings us to the absolute core concept of this explainer, Jidoka. Jidoka is a control system that supervises manufacturing, but here's the kicker. It stops a process immediately the second it detects an error. That immediate halt speeds up root cause investigation. It is literally the savior of process control because it prevents small problems from bleeding into the final product. You don't just wait and scrap 1,000 defective units at the end of the shift. No way. You stop the line at the very first bad one. There is a lot of myth versus reality when it comes to this concept, but this quote from Bengt Strom at ABB Robotics clears it up perfectly. He says, "We prefer the more holistic concept that the automation system is intelligent enough to assess what is going on and act accordingly as a human being might." The reality here is that Jidoka isn't just some simple off switch or emergency stop button. It's about injecting human-like evaluation directly into the machinery itself.
Part 2. The pharmaceutical Toyota ambition and how industries try to implement Jidoka.
So let's jump back to 2007. Novartis set this massively bold goal, publicly claiming that they plan to become the Toyota of the pharmaceutical industry. Now, the Toyota production system has two main pillars. The pharma industry was super eager to embrace the first pillar, Kanban, which is basically just-in-time production. But they have significantly struggled to develop real initiatives around that second pillar, which is Jidoka.
This quote from Bob Honor of Rockwell Automation hits the nail on the head when it comes to that gap in adoption. He noted, at this point, many pharma companies are still happy to get into production. Think about the contrast here. You have industries like plastics or semiconductor manufacturing where facilities have used these exact principles to exceed an incredible 8 sigma over the past 20 years. Pharma, by comparison, they were kind of just happy to keep the machines running without breaking down.
Part 3. The Process Control Progress Report, diving into the 2007 survey data.
Now, what's really interesting about this data is when we break down the adoption of process analytical technologies, or PAT, and quality by design. We see 27% of companies were doing both, 25% were doing PAT and planning quality by design, while 21% were doing neither. PAT is absolutely crucial here. Why? Because it represents the physical embodiment of Jidoka in the pharmaceutical industry by giving them real-time feedback. It's essentially the system actively looking at the product as it moves down the line.
So how does this fit into their overall operational structure? Well, it acts as a true progress report for an industry that was just inching toward an ideal. When asked about the alignment of IT, automation, and continuous improvement projects, 40% were aligned to some extent. 29% were moving forward, but a solid 30% were not yet in sync. They were definitely striving to sync up their continuous improvement projects, but it's clear the internal teams were still heavily siloed off from one another.
But you know, behind all those numbers is a massive amount of cultural friction. And this quote perfectly humanizes that struggle. One survey respondent vented, "I have tried to implement some of these controls, but our director believes that we should control inputs rather than outputs."
This perfectly highlights a rigid mindset that fundamentally blocks the adoption of output-driven control philosophies. You simply can't have an intelligent Jidoka-style system if your management is only looking at what goes in and completely refuses to assess the quality of what's actually coming out.
Part 4. Advanced Tech and Robotics. Essentially, the brain and hands of the operation.
When we synthesized the advanced tech that respondents were exploring for process control, simulation was leading the pack at 39%, followed by fuzzy logic and AI at 23%, and model predictive control at 13%. But we really have to contextualize this. For a lot of pharma companies at that time, concepts like fuzzy logic or adaptive control weren't seen as practical everyday tools. They were viewed almost like alien research projects.
So, the absolutely crucial point is found right here in the key process control issues they identified for 2007. The top priorities were developing trending data for equipment and, crucially, improving alarm management. Improving alarm management is literally the cornerstone of Jidoka and the human-machine interface. Think about it. If the alarms are just meaningless constant noise, the human operators can't effectively act. But if the system is smart, the alarm directly guides human intervention to fix the actual root cause of the problem.
Bringing it back to the physical world and our robot friend here, the data showed that about 28% of respondents were in the early adoption phase of robotics, mostly for packaging and sample preparation. As industry experts point out, Jidoka principles apply incredibly well to the fill and finish portions of manufacturing. That's exactly where you want a system smart enough to instantly catch a missing label or a half-filled vial before it ever gets packed into a shipping box.
Part 5. Applying Jidoka to agile teams. Let's talk about the Andon cord system.
And this brilliantly illustrates how modern software teams have taken these exact physical principles and completely abstracted them into the digital space. Enter the Andon cord system. In agile workflows, this is a lean mechanism for rapid problem resolution. It empowers literally any team member to halt work when a defect or blocker is found. It is exactly Jidoka, just applied to code and human workflows instead of physical widgets moving down a conveyor belt. In this digital environment, Scrum Masters essentially act as the intelligent human face of the system. Just as Jidoka manages errors on a physical line, Agile themes heavily prioritize conflict management, spotting hidden blockers, impediment removal, and sprint retrospectives. A Scrum Master is highly trained, almost like a detective, to spot those hidden blockers and manage friction. They make sure the digital assembly line doesn't just blindly push buggy software forward.
Let's break down exactly how this plays out step by step. Step 1. Spot the hidden blockers. Step 2. Pull the Andon cord to immediately halt the defective process. Step 3. Execute a sprint retrospective. This workflow ties the Agile Scrum Master's entire role directly back to the 18th century roots of the Jidoka philosophy. You stop the line immediately to lock in a root cause fix, actually learning from the error rather than just finding a quick workaround.
Which brings us to our final takeaway, and a really big question for you to chew on. Whether you're building complex robotics, manufacturing life-saving pharmaceuticals, or coding the next big killer app, the fundamental question is the same. Is your team just running on blind automation, pushing problems further down the line? Or do you have the power and the intelligence to pull the Andon cord? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you on the next one.